Wow, this is the ivory tower. I don't see any ivory. I blow my nose in your general direction. Your mother was a hamster. We're at Hubbard Tower Park in Montpelier today, and we're going to be discussing school choice. As you know, the Supreme Court recently ruled Montana's state constitution discriminated against religious schools when it barred families from using a tax credit scholarship to enroll children in these schools. And my guest today discussing that issue, two former legislators from Vermont. Let me introduce Bob Frenier. Bob served on the House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development, and Dave Sharpe. Dave served in the House in the last 3 years as chair of the House Education Committee. Thank you both for being here today. At some point we'll figure out why I'm in this outfit and why we had to pick such a hot day to do it, but those are the breaks. Thank you both for being with me today. So let me ask you both right off the bat, how do you think this ruling is going to affect Vermont? Dave, you want to go first?
So it will be very interesting to see how. We have virtually every variety of school choice in the state right now. The real question here, I think, and it's reflected in this Supreme Court ruling, is who's going to pay for this choice? And that's been an ongoing debate in Vermont, not just about religious schools, but other private schools.
Bob, how do you think it's going to affect
Well, Vermont has never had a Blaine Amendment, which is the rule of law in about 40 other states. And there's 2,300 kids in Catholic school now, but there's 8,000 kids, Dave probably knows this better, between 7,000 and 8,000 kids who go to school from choice towns, and now they're going to have an opportunity, if they choose, to go to a religious school, and for all practical purposes, a Catholic school. And that's going to raise up for the parents of those thousands of children, what's the difference between the public school and the Catholic school? And that will be a very interesting conversation.
Yeah. Well, as you both know, the ruling has drawn some criticism from teachers' unions. They say that it's a threat to public school funding. Bob, do you think it is a threat? And do you think maybe it's just more, trying to protect mediocre schools?
I don't think it's either. I think that, first of all, the teachers' union is a labor union. Its job is to protect salaries, working conditions, and benefits. So having children go to a school where there's not a union is just not a good thing for the teachers' union. And I would say that's at the root of it for them, and it's as is appropriate. The argument they're using, I don't think has much weight.
You agree, Dave?
Well, from me, I think the teachers' union is focused on kids and classroom performance. And we don't do a very good job in the state with low-income kids, whether they're white or non-white students. To me, that's the real underlying issue that we have to deal with in this state.
But with real school choice, don't you think that schools would be forced to provide better education to attract students? It becomes it's a competitive market.
Well, like I said in the intro, the question here is not whether a student has a choice. The question is, who's going to pay for that choice? And every dollar, my concern is that every dollar that's used to pay for non-public schools draws money out of those public schools and raises costs for taxpayers that are already too high for paying for public schools.
But wouldn't school choice save us money? Wouldn't it save taxpayers money?
Catholic schools charge less than $7,000 for their tuition.
Right.
Somehow they get the job done. Dave will point out rightly that they don't have to deal with the full panoply of special education.
Yeah.
But that could also use a heavy dose of competition.
So wouldn't it provide more opportunities for lower income families? Students?
No, I don't believe it would. And the discussion really is, do we want to privatize education in the state or in the nation? There are certainly those in the current administration at the federal level that believe that that's the appropriate way to go. We give every student in the state a voucher for X number of thousands of dollars and say, go to whatever school you want. The problem is, are we going to provide transportation for all these kids? Are we going to provide food, lunches for all these kids? Are we going to provide special needs for all these kids? Or are we just going to give them the 14 grand or whatever the number happens to be? And yes, if we did that, it would be cheaper. I wonder what the impact would be on kids that don't have transportation, that can't put food on the table, that are struggling in many ways already.
So I think we see, Bob, it's not really as simple as let's just have school choice and said and done, and it's that easy.
To Dave's point, if you're a parent and you've got a voucher for $15,000, $16,000, $17,000, the market will respond with transportation and lunches. We have maybe 125,000, 130,000 parents. If they're running around with a $15,000 or $17,000 voucher in their market, that's a $1.7 billion market. The educational entrepreneurs are going to be swarming this place.
Dave?
Well, I think the evidence that Bob presents is not borne out, and it's the kids who are struggling, who are being left behind. To be fair, I think public education has not served these children well either. So we need to have a discussion in this state as to how are we going to lift up the third of Vermont students who now live in poverty. On the other hand, I would say the basis of our democracy is public education. If we move away from public education, we threaten the very basis of our democracy. And I think we have to have some very serious conversations before we think about what this whole notion of paying for school choice
But we're not really moving
implications
away
are.
from public education. We're just giving people the choice. They can go to a public school or they can go to a private school. It's their choice.
And it always has been. The question is, who's going to pay for that?
Yeah, I would
So-
say that it always has been.
Yeah.
And the only people who get to decide are the people who have some wealth. That lower third that Dave talks about, which is not being served, they have no choice.
Let's talk about what's happening right now. Of course, with the pandemic, we're seeing a lot of involvement from the federal government, stimulus packages, and how much will the federal government get involved? Will there be some strings attached to schools, and perhaps a private school might go, you know what, we don't like these strings.
What has really concerned me during this COVID thing and the PPP and the other stimulus packages, trillions of dollars out of the federal government, private schools are eligible for that money and have tapped into that money. This decision about Montana probably means that religious schools will be able to tap into that money. Public schools cannot. So public schools, the taxes are going to go up on public schools. Private schools are going to be able to offer lower tuition, because there is this determination on the part of the administration in Washington now. There's maybe the administration in Vermont to move to private education. So we're going to put any incentives and benefits into private education.
Bob?
I think private education is not as accurate a term as I would use. We have government schools and we have independent schools, but if we have school choice, the parents of the children who have the fundamental responsibility for that child's education, they're going to decide. What we have now is we're trying to drive square student pegs into round educational holes, and it's not only is it a disaster, it's borderline a crime as far as I'm concerned to have 80% of the school lunch kids, the poorer kids in the 9th grade, not be able to pass the math test.
Dave, you want to jump in?
Well, I think every teacher and every administrator, every superintendent in the state, whether they're at a religious school or a private school or a ski school or an elite school or a public school, they are focused on the students in their building. And they will do everything they can to make sure that those students succeed. To start blaming segments of the educational community for not caring about the success of their students is just a rat hole I'm not willing to go down. I think, of course there's a bad apple here and there, but the overwhelming majority, regardless of what kind of school their child is going to, the educators in that school are doing everything they can to have that child be successful.
So guys, I didn't cut myself either, pretty good.
I was watching.
I'd like to get back to the area of religion in private schools, because I think that's one of the areas that it's really going to be, that's where there's a real hang-up. It's the religious schools that might have more objection about some of the things that may be attached that the federal government may want them to teach. It may not go along with their ideology. How do you get through all of that?
So my dad was a minister. And I was brought up with a very strong understanding that there is a separation between church and state. The countries where the church runs things don't particularly work out well for the citizenry. So the notion of the establishment of our democracy in America was that the church would not be involved in running government, and government would not be involved in supporting churches. And this blurs the line further between what is state support of churches and what is church influence in government. I think that's a problem that we need to consider.
Bob, how do you resolve that issue? If the federal government says this is the way we teach things, and a religious school, just take abortion for instance, that's something that would be a grave problem.
Well, first of all, the federal government, the federal Constitution says nothing about education, which is mostly why I think these cases have been decided in the courts as a result of lawsuits and not in the legislature. In the last 40, 50 years, what's been happening is that the courts have dealt with the issue of how much the federal government and the state governments are going to stay out of the religion business. And what this court said, and it's the result of the Missouri case, I forget what the name of it is, and what they say now is that there's a distinction between what is taught and where it is taught. And as long as the government gets their full value for geometry, English, and science and the other subjects, the other things that may or may not get taught there are not the government's business.
So often in these conversations, discussions, arguments, whatever, you really don't hear a lot about the kids. It's a lot about curriculum. It's a lot about the teachers. Teachers unions get involved, what they want to do. And I think sometimes the kids really do get left out of the whole equation.
I think that's where Bob and I can come together.
Yeah.
We have not done a good job in private or in public schools with our children from low-income families. I think Bob and I can agree that it's that segment of society that we're failing.
I'm going to give you both an opportunity to waive in this case today, and be careful, I am licensed to carry this. We usually use a magic wand, but today we'll use the magic sword. And you can wave the sword, or I can wave it for you if you wish. And you can wish for whatever you'd like. And Dave, I'll let you go first. You want me to wave it for you?
No,
it's a dangerous weapon.
I've wanted my hands on a sword for a long time.
You've been eyeing that, haven't you? Yeah.
Geez, I would wish for a society where we care for every individual in that society, and we bring every person up to the level of their excellence.
Nice wish. Bob, there you go.
David and I are in absolute agreement about that. I think we only question the methodology, and I feel like until the money goes through the parents' hands to the school, that the child will not get served as selflessly as required. But between the Agency of Education and the Teachers Union, there's a barrier between what those school lunch kids need, and I don't know how to describe it, but I know that it's there because the kids are not succeeding in the current system. I like this.
There you go. I want to thank you both for being with me today. Bob Frenier. Bob, thank you for being. Dave Sharpe, thank you for being with me as well. And want to remind you that you can watch more episodes of Travels with Charlie on Facebook and YouTube, and I'll see you in my travels.
I want to hear what unravels. I'll see you in my travels, and I'll be hanging round, covering lots of If be so kind to share what's on
It's only
your
a flesh
mind. It's time well spent talking president. Though we may not agree, let your thoughts run.